The morning Kunar province tried to kill Riley Carson, the mountains looked almost beautiful. That is the thing nobody tells you about Afghanistan. The violence and the beauty live inside each other, pressed together so tight you cannot separate them. The peaks of the Hindu Kush caught the first gray light of a September dawn and turned it gold, and the valley below sat quiet and still, the way only a place full of hidden danger can be quiet. Not peaceful, waiting. Doc Harmon saw the blood trail first. He had been moving fast boots, finding the rocky ground with the practiced certainty of a man who had done this too many times in too many countries. Then his flashlight swept low across the earth, and he stopped. Behind him, Doc Reeves nearly walked into his back. The trail was dark and wide and continuous. No breaks, no drag marks. Just a long, uninterrupted streak of red-black against gray stone, stretching back into the darkness and farther than either man's light could reach. Harmon knelt, pressed two fingers to the edge of the trail, still wet. He stood slowly and looked ahead. 40 meters out, something was moving. Low to the ground, pulling itself forward with both arms, one agonizing pull at a time. He keyed his radio. "Sarge," his voice came out quieter than he intended. "She's not being dragged. She's crawling on her own." Static. Then say again, "The trail, it's hers, she made it herself." He watched the shape move. Slow, determined, never stopping. "How far back does it go?" Reeves had already turned and walked the beam of his light down the length of the trail, back and back, into the dark valley behind them. He turned around. His face said everything before his mouth did. 2,000 meters, sir," Reeves said quietly. "Give or take." Harmon looked at the figure still pulling itself forward in the darkness ahead. Still moving, still not stopping. He did not have words for what he was looking at. He started walking faster. 31 hours earlier, Riley Carson was standing in a supply room at Forward Operating Base Blessing, trying to understand why her name was on a mission roster she had never signed up for. FOB Blessing sat in the Peach River Valley in Kunar Province, eastern Afghanistan, a rough collection of hardened structures and sandbag walls pressed against the base of mountains that looked like they had been designed specifically to make human beings feel small. It had been operational since 2006. The soldiers who cycled through it developed a particular relationship with the place, not affection exactly, but the kind of familiarity you build with something that has tried to hurt you repeatedly. You learned its rhythms. You learned where the blind spots were. You learned not to think too hard about the mountains at night. Riley had been at Blessing for 6 weeks. Long enough to know the place, not long enough to stop watching the tree lines. She was 26 years old, 5 feet 4 inches, 119 pounds, though nobody who saw her in her gear would have guessed that low. She carried herself in a way that added presence without adding volume. Brown hair pulled back and secured in a way that would not move in any condition. Gray eyes that were quiet and observant in a manner that some people found unsettling, because the eyes of someone that young were not supposed to look that settled. She was a Navy corpsman. Hospital corpsman, second class if you wanted the full designation. Assigned to the 2nd Battalion 327th Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, and technically not supposed to be anywhere near SEAL Team 3, Task Unit Trident, or the mission briefing she was now sitting inside of. The reason she was here was simple and on its surface unfortunate. Petty Officer 2nd Class Marcus Doyle, the corpsman who was supposed to be on this mission, who had been training with Task Unit Trident for 3 weeks, who knew every man on the team by name, and had a system built, had broken his wrist 4 hours ago during a routine equipment check. A crate had shifted. His hand had been in the wrong place. 3 bones, the surgeon said. Clean breaks, but enough to make field operations impossible for 8 to 10 weeks. The mission could not be delayed. The intelligence had a shelf life measured in hours, not days. Someone had gone looking for a replacement. Someone had found Riley's name on a list of female corpsmen currently on base who had completed the cultural support team screening process. The CST program was relatively new, a recognition that certain operational environments required women embedded with the combat elements for searches of Afghan households. Riley had completed the screening 4 months ago. She had passed every component. She had never expected to be called. She had been called at 2200 hours. The briefing was at 2300. The team departed at 0130. What nobody at FOB Blessing knew that night, what would not surface for another 72 hours, was that Doyle's broken wrist had not been an accident. A message had moved through a cutout to someone on base with access to the pre-deployment staging area. A shifted equipment crate, a specific weight, a specific angle, a specific moment when no one was watching. 3 broken bones and a wrist, and Riley Carson's name moved from the reserve list to the roster. Someone had needed a replacement who would not know the team, who would have no established pattern of movement that could be anticipated. Someone had arranged it. That someone had not counted on what the replacement knew. None of them had, but that accounting would come later. On the night of the briefing, Riley knew only what the duty officer had told her. She had 2 hours to prepare. She used them. Chief Petty Officer Garrett Slade had looked at her when she walked into the briefing room, and his expression communicated a precise and complete thought without using a single word. He was 44 years old, built like something that had been carved rather than born, with a jaw that looked structural and eyes that had the specific flatness of a man who had learned not to show anything on his face in situations where showing something might get somebody killed. He had 4 combat deployments. He had buried 3 men he considered brothers. He did not like surprises, and Riley Carson was at this particular moment a surprise. He said nothing to her directly. He continued the briefing. Petty Officer First Class Stovall was less restrained. Stovall was 31, broad across the shoulders, with a manner of speaking that was not cruel but was absolutely unfiltered. He waited until Slade had finished the terrain portion before leaning toward the man next to him. Callum Wade, SEAL sniper, who had the kind of stillness in his features that suggested he heard everything and filed it away for later, and saying at a volume clearly intended to carry, "We bringing a medic or a liability?" Riley did not look up from the map she was studying. Chief Hollis, seated to her left, glanced at her sideways. He was the oldest operator in the room, 51, gray at the temples, quiet in a way that was different from Slade's quiet. Slade's quiet was controlled. Hollis's quiet was patient. There was a difference. He watched Riley not react to Stovall's comment, and something small moved behind his eyes. He said nothing. He went back to studying the terrain overlay. The mission was Operation Silent Ridgeline. The objective was reconnaissance and intelligence confirmation. A suspected Taliban command node operating out of a compound network in the mountains northeast of Blessing. The team would infiltrate on foot during the hours of darkness, establish observation positions, confirm or deny the presence of the command element, and exfiltrate before first light. 12 SEALs, 2 attached Army Rangers, 1 civilian intelligence contractor named Drummond, who would serve as the local liaison back at the FOB in Riley. Riley was there to provide medical support and to assist with any cultural support requirements. She was not there to carry a rifle. Stovall had made that particular point to Slade before the briefing concluded, suggesting her kit be limited to her medical pack and a sidearm given the weight and noise considerations of the mission profile. Slade had agreed. Riley had said nothing. She had, however, noted the exact location of every additional weapon on the vehicle that drove them to the insertion point. She noted it the way a person notes where the exits are in an unfamiliar building. Reflex, not planning, just awareness. Sergeant Pemberton, one of the Rangers attached to the element, had looked at her hands when she picked up her medical pack to move out. He was 28, solid, with the permanently sunburned complexion of someone who spent too much time at altitude. He made his assessment quickly and without malice. "You good to carry that if we move fast?" he asked. "Yes," Riley said, "because if it slows us down, it won't." Pemberton looked at her for another second, then nodded and moved out. Riley settled the pack across her shoulders, adjusted the straps with 2 practice movements, and followed. They moved for 3 hours before the mountains gave her anything to do. The infiltration route took them northeast, climbing through terrain that punished the legs and the lungs in equal measure. The path was narrow and dark, the team moving in a loose column with night vision binoculars turning the world into shades of green. No talking, hand signals, and pre-established radio protocols only. The kind of silence that becomes its own kind of noise after a while, filling your head with every sound the valley makes, the wind across stone, the distant sound of water, the soft percussion of boots on rocky ground. Riley moved in the middle of the column. She was not the slowest. She was not the fastest. She maintained her interval with a consistency that nobody commented on because there was nothing to comment on. She watched the terrain the way her father had taught her to watch, it not looking at any one thing, but letting the whole picture come to her the way you have to look at stars, sometimes slightly to the side of what you want to see to let your peripheral vision do the work. She noticed things. She noticed the way Pemberton was moving. There was something in his gait that was not right. A slight heaviness in the left leg that was not there when they had started out. The kind of thing that builds slowly and announces itself only after the damage is already compounding. She watched him for 40 minutes before she was certain enough to act. She keyed her radio on the team medical channel, not the main net. Kept her voice at the level of breathing. "Pemberton, drop back 30 feet. A pause. "Say again. 30 feet. Off the main trail. Now, he hesitated. She could see it in his shoulders. Then he stepped aside and let the man behind him pass, drifting back until he was beside her. She did not stop walking. She moved alongside him, watching his face, watching the way he was distributing his weight. "How long has your left leg been heavy?" she asked. "It's fine." "It's not." Her voice was neutral, not challenging, informational. "Right arm or left arm, does your urine look normal?" Something shifted in his expression. "Little dark," he admitted. "Since when? Yesterday afternoon, maybe." She pulled a small bottle from the side pocket of her pack without breaking stride, handed it to him. "Drink all of that right now, both of these when you've finished." She pressed 2 tablets into his palm. "When we stop, I need your blood pressure and your temperature." "What is it?" "Your muscles are breaking down faster than your kidneys are clearing it. Rhabdomyolysis. Early stage, or you'd already be down." She looked at him steadily. "Drink the water." He drank it. They walked another 100 meters before he said quietly, "How'd you spot that?" "I've been watching you for 40 minutes. The gait change is subtle. You didn't notice it yourself." "I didn't. Most people don't. That's the problem." She moved back to her position in the column. Ahead of her, she could see Hollis slightly adjust his angle to look back at her just for a moment, just long enough to register what he had witnessed before facing forward again. 20 minutes later, at a scheduled rest halt, Slade came back to check the team. He found Pemberton sitting with Riley, who had a small blood pressure cuff on his arm and was noting a reading on her palm with a pen. Slade looked at the reading, looked at Riley. "He's stable," she said. "He needs to stay hydrated, and we need to watch his output. If he starts showing neurological signs, he needs to come off the mission." Slade looked at Pemberton. "You good to continue?" "Yes, sir," Pemberton said. She caught it early. Slade held Riley's gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Not warmly, but differently than before. He nodded once and moved back up the column. From 4 meters up the line, Stovall watched the exchange. He said nothing. His jaw moved slightly, the way a jaw moves when a person is reassessing something they were fairly certain about. They were 90 minutes from the objective when Riley noticed the wind. It was a small thing, a shift. The kind of change in air movement that most people don't have a name for, that registers only as a vague sense that something has altered without being able to say what. She had spent enough days on open ground as a child to read it almost without thinking, the way the valley funneled air, the way the rock formations on the eastern ridge created a channeling effect, the way the temperature drop of early morning would interact with the terrain to produce specific movement patterns at specific altitudes. She was not thinking about shooting. She was thinking about sound and smell, and the way those things moved in conditions like this. But the part of her that had been asleep for years heard something in the data she was processing, and her mouth moved before she could decide whether it was appropriate. "The ridgeline is pushing northeast now," she said to no one in particular, to the general space around her. "If there are observation posts up on the eastern face, our thermal signatures would be moving away from them rather than toward. Better approach angle would be from the secondary drainage, not the main track." Silence. She felt it immediately, felt the quality of the silence, what it meant, what she had just revealed without intending to. She stopped talking. Callum Way, 3 meters to her right, had not stopped moving. But his head had turned a few degrees in her direction, and in the green light of the night vision, she could see his eyes had found her. Not suspiciously, with the calm attention of a man filing a data point he expects to be useful later. She said nothing more. Hollis, walking directly behind her, fell into step at her shoulder for a moment. He did not speak, but when he pulled back to his original position, his hand briefly contacted her shoulder. The lightest possible touch. A communication that contained only one word. Noted. Riley kept walking, kept her eyes on the terrain ahead, kept her face where she had learned to keep it, in the particular stillness that was not absence but management. 10 meters ahead, Stovall caught the exchange. He glanced back at her, once his expression carrying something she recognized, a question he was not asking yet, a category he was beginning to reconsider. The column continued northeast. The mountains continued to be beautiful and indifferent. Riley Carson walked in the middle of it, carrying what she carried, keeping what she kept. She had no idea what was waiting for her 47 minutes ahead. The rest halt before the final approach lasted 9 minutes. Slade crouched with the terrain map confirming the last leg of the route with Wade and 2 of the SEALs. Hollis pulled security to the north. Pemberton sat with his back to a rock, looking steadier than he had 2 hours ago, and caught Riley's eye long enough to nod. One small acknowledgement of debt. Riley was checking her kit, methodical, systematic. The way her father had taught her to check everything before anything happened, Not because you expected it to, but because preparation was the only honest form of confidence. IFAC, tourniquet access, morphine auto-injectors, combat gauze, chest seals, the Beretta M9 on her hip that she had carried for 18 months and fired only at paper targets. She thought about it briefly. Then she closed the flap on her kit and stopped thinking about it. Slade came to her at the 8-minute mark. He crouched in a way that put his face level with hers but made clear the conversation would be brief. The approach route takes us through a section that had IED activity 6 weeks ago. EOD swept it 2 weeks back. Should be clear, but should be and is are different things. Understood. You stay in the middle of the column. You don't deviate from the path of the man in front of you. One step to either side and you take it back immediately. Understood. He studied her face for a moment, not looking for reassurance, looking for the thing behind her eyes that had made a comment about thermal signatures and then shut down like a door closing. He did not find it because she did not let him. You did right with Pemberton, he said. He's a good soldier. He would have pushed through it and gone down at the worst possible moment. Yeah, Slade stood. Stay tight. He moved back to the front of the column. Riley let out a breath so small it barely counted as a breath. She reset her pack, adjusted the straps, and looked up at the mountains that were beginning in the east to show the very first reluctant suggestion of gray. It was 0447 when the column moved out for the final approach. Riley was fourth in the line. The path narrowed as they moved into the final drainage. Rock walls rose on both sides, pushing the column closer together, the kind of terrain that made experienced soldiers quieter and more watchful. When the ground channels you, you pay attention. They had been moving for 6 minutes when Riley registered something. She registered it the way you register a word you have misread, not consciously, not immediately, but as a vague friction, a sense that something is not quite what it should be. She was looking at the ground 4 feet ahead at the track left by the man in front of her, and something about the surface near the inside edge of a small outcropping was not matching the surrounding stone. Not in color, in texture, in the way the disturbed material around it had settled. Her foot was mid-stride. The thought arrived in the time it took for her boot to continue moving forward. It was not fast enough. The pressure plate registered 11 pounds per square inch of force. The IED beneath it had been placed by someone who understood the geometry of the drainage, who knew where the natural step would fall, who had waited for exactly this weight distribution in exactly this position. The detonation took 0.3 seconds from contact to full pressure wave. Riley Carson did not hear it. People almost never hear the one that gets them. What she knew next was the ground. It was against her face. The rock was cold. There was a sound in her ears that was not sound exactly, but was instead the absence of all other sounds, a high ringing void where the world had been. Her vision was gray at the edges and narrowing, and the sky above her, where she could see it between the rock walls, was still that color that is not quite black and not quite gray. The color of a moment before anything. She tried to move her legs. She understood immediately that something was wrong. The information arrived without ceremony. Both legs below the knee were destroyed. She could not see them from where she lay, and she did not try to. Some information you process without looking, because looking will take something from you that you need for other things. The world was starting to come back. Sound first. The crack of small arms fire from the ridgelines on both sides closed multiple positions, the distinctive pattern of a coordinated ambush. She could hear the team returning fire somewhere ahead, voices cutting through the chaos, Slade's voice specific and commanding. She had been separated from the column. The explosion had done that. She was in the open in the middle of the drainage with rock walls on both sides and fire coming from above, and she was alone. She had 2 minutes, possibly less, before the blood loss reached the threshold where her ability to think clearly would begin to degrade. She knew this the way she knew her own name. She had taught this fact to other people on a chalk-written diagram. Her hands were already moving. Left tourniquet first. The cat was on her left hip, accessible by feel in the dark, and her fingers found it without searching. She set it high and tight on the left thigh, above where the structural integrity of the leg ended, and she cranked the windlass until the bleeding pressure changed. She bit down on the pain. Not to be tough, because screaming would cost her oxygen, and oxygen cost her time. Right tourniquet. She had trained this motion more times than she could count. Her hands knew what to do anyway. She reached for the morphine auto-injector, hesitated for exactly 1 second, the hesitation of a medic calculating whether the benefit of pain management outweighs the risk of a pressure drop in hemorrhagic shock. She made the call. Injected. 45 minutes of functional pain management, maybe 50 given her body weight. She looked at the sky. Still not light. Still that color. The radio on her chest had taken fragment damage. She could hear through it, but the transmit function was intermittent. Through the static, she caught pieces, Slade's voice reporting that the team element had been driven into a box canyon to the northeast, that 40 personnel, including a ranger element that had linked up, were now pinned without egress, that air assets could not enter due to confirmed manpad presence on the upper ridgeline, that the situation required immediate resolution before daylight made their position untenable. 40 people. The only route out of that canyon went through this drainage. Through her position. She looked at her map. She had memorized it before the mission, the way her father had always told her to memorize maps not as reference material, but as landscape, as a place you had already been in your mind before your feet arrived. The distance from her current position to the mouth of the box canyon along the safest navigable route, avoiding the secondary IED indicator she had flagged on the approach, was approximately 2,000 meters. She thought about that number. Then she thought about Slade's voice on the radio. She thought about Pemberton sitting against that rock with his blood pressure dropping and her catching it early enough to matter. She thought about 40 people in a canyon with daylight coming. She looked at the ground in front of her, found the direction. She put her forearms flat against the rock and she started to pull. One foot, then another, then another. The pain arrived fully as the morphine began its work, which sounds like a paradox but is not. The medication takes enough of the edge away that you can feel the full shape of what remains clearly and completely. She pulled through it the way her father had taught her to pull through anything, not by denying that it was there, but by keeping it behind her and working ahead of it. Pain was not the enemy. Stopping was the enemy. One foot, then another. The sky above the canyon walls was beginning to lighten. She kept moving. Behind her, the blood trail was already beginning. Red against gray stone, dark and continuous and unbroken, stretching back from where she pulled herself forward, marking each meter she covered with the specific and indelible record of what it cost. She did not look back. There was nothing behind her that she needed to see. The morphine did not take the pain away. What it did was change her relationship to it. It moved the pain to a different room in the house and it closed the door, and she could still hear everything happening in that room. Every impact, every sharp edge, every sustained note of damage. But she was no longer required to stand in the middle of it. She could work. She could think. She could put her forearms against the rock and pull herself forward because the thing that needed doing had not changed simply because her body was not cooperating. She understood this clinically. She had explained it to patients. She had never experienced it from this side of the explanation. She had covered approximately 200 meters. She knew this because she was counting her pulls. Every time her right forearm hit the ground and she dragged her body forward, she was covering roughly 40 centimeters. She was counting in sets of 25, which was 100 pulls, which was approximately 40 meters, which gave her a number she could track against the map she carried in her head. The map said she had 1,800 meters remaining. She did not look at that number directly. She looked at the next 25 pulls. Her father had told her this. He had not told it to her about crawling injured across an Afghan valley in the dark. He had told it to her about a mountain in Montana when she was 12 years old, when she had made the mistake of stopping on a steep section and looking up at how much remained, and the distance had made something go hollow in her chest. He had been 4 steps ahead of her, and he had turned around without her saying a word because he always knew, and he had come back down to her level and crouched in front of her on the slope. "Don't look at the top," he said. His voice was the kind of quiet that carried perfectly in open air. "The top doesn't exist yet. Look at the next step." She was 12. She wanted to argue. She was also smart enough to know when Daniel Carson was telling her something worth keeping. She looked at the next step. They reached the summit 40 minutes later. She was pulling herself across the floor of a valley in Afghanistan 14 years after that afternoon, and she was looking at the next pull, and the memory of his voice was so specific and so complete that it occupied the same mental space as a physical presence, the way a strong memory can be almost tactile, almost real enough to reach. Daniel Carson, Master Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, Force Reconnaissance, 1st Reconnaissance Battalion. 21 years of service across 3 combat deployments before the 4th one that did not bring him home. He had been 46 years old when the vehicle he was riding in struck a roadside bomb outside Fallujah in the spring of 2008. Riley had been 22 at the time, finishing her 2nd year of pre-nursing coursework at the University of Montana, working 2 jobs, sending part of every paycheck home to her mother because the bills had a way of multiplying faster than the paychecks did. She had gotten the call on a Tuesday morning. She had been standing in the parking lot of a grocery store. She remembered the specific quality of the light. She had not cried immediately. That was the thing she remembered most clearly. Not the grief itself, but the delay in it, the strange efficiency with which she had continued through the next hours, making phone calls, booking a flight home, telling her supervisor she would need time. The grief had arrived 3 days later, suddenly and completely, while she was standing in her father's workshop in the garage of the house in Helena touching his tools. And it had been large enough that she had sat down on the concrete floor and stayed there for a long time. His letter had been with the personal effects they returned. He had written it before the deployment, as he apparently wrote a letter before every deployment. She had not known this until her mother handed it to her. The envelope had her name on the front in his handwriting, which was precise and deliberate the way all of him had been precise and deliberate. She had read it so many times that certain phrases had become permanent, installed in a part of her memory that did not degrade. The part she thought about most was near the end. He had written, "Your hands can save people. I have watched you understand things about medicine that doctors twice your age have not figured out yet. There is something in how you see a person, how you know where the damage is before anyone tells you. Do not ever let anyone tell you that being the one who heals instead of the one who fights is somehow less. It is not less. It is the harder thing. It takes more from you and it asks you to keep giving. I am more proud of what you are becoming than I have words to say." Then below that, in a slightly different pen, like it had been added later, "If there ever comes a time when healing is not enough, you will know. And you will do what needs doing. I trust you." She pulled herself through another 25 before she registered the sound. Voices. She stopped moving. Stopped completely. Pressed herself lower against the rock, which she had not fully believed was possible, but the body has a capacity to flatten itself when the survival instinct speaks that overrides most physical limitations. 3 men, northeast, angling toward her from the ridge bordering the right side of the drainage. She could not see them yet, but she could hear the pattern of their movement. 2, sometimes 3 sets of boots on loose stone, the specific acoustic signature of people descending a slope in the dark. Taliban patrol, sweeping the drainage, looking for her. She moved her right hand to the Beretta on her hip and stopped with her fingers on the grip. If she fired, the sound would carry to every position in the valley. She released the grip, moved her hand flat against the stone. They came into visual range as the light was strengthening. 3 men in dark clothing, moving carefully down the slope, armed, sweeping their lights at ground level. Looking for the blood trail. The blood trail she had been leaving for 200 meters. The gap between the end of the blood trail and her current position was approximately 3 meters of harder stone where the bleeding had thinned. They moved their lights slowly across the ground. She controlled her breathing. 4 counts in. Hold. 7 counts. 8 counts out. She had learned this from a shooting coach. She had never told anyone about a retired Marine gunnery sergeant who ran a range outside Missoula and who had taken her on as an informal student when she was 16 because her father had called in a favor. She had learned the breathing for rifle work. She used it now for staying alive. The light from one of the flashlights swept within 6 feet of her position. She did not move. She was not breathing. The light moved on. 40 seconds later, the voices moved away. She heard them work their way back up the slope, their footsteps diminishing into the general sounds of the valley. She let the breath out. She put her forearms against the rock. She started pulling again. 3 kilometers away on a ridgeline that gave him sight lines into 3 separate valleys, Callum Wade was watching through the night force scope of his M40A3 and building a picture he did not like. Wade operated in a specific kind of cognitive space when he was working. Everything irrelevant receded. Everything relevant expanded to fill the available attention. He did not experience emotion during this process in any conventional sense. The emotion was present but filed away for later, the way a surgeon's discomfort with a difficult procedure is real but does not interfere with the cutting. He had been doing this for 9 years. What he was watching was making it harder than usual to maintain that separation. The Taliban element in the valley was not behaving the way an ambush element normally behaves after a successful IED strike. An ambush element strikes and presses, maximizing the advantage of chaos and disorientation. This element had struck hard and then held. They had driven Slade's element into the canyon and sent a patrol into the drainage, but the patrol was searching, not pressing. They were looking for something specific. He had watched the patrol sweep the drainage. He had watched them approach the position where Riley should have been and come up empty, which meant she had moved, which meant she was still alive. He recalculated her possible position based on the trail origin point and the elapsed time and the limitations of her injuries, and he understood that what she was doing was not possible by any clinical measure he was aware of. He filed that away too. He shifted his scope to the north and found the thing that had been nagging at the edge of his attention for the last 20 minutes. There was a radio communication occurring on a frequency that should not have been active in this valley at this time. He had a secondary monitoring device that captured frequency signatures without decoding content, and the signature he was seeing matched a handset that had been checked out from FOB Blessing's communications inventory. The handset had been checked out at 1845 hours the previous evening by Drummond. Wade thought about this for exactly as long as it took to be certain about what it meant. Then he keyed his radio on the command channel. Slade, Wade, I need 30 seconds. Go. The patrol in the drainage is not sweeping for survivors. They're executing a capture operation. They have specific information about our route and our timing. That information came from inside Blessing. Wade kept his voice flat. Drummond checked out a communications handset at 1845 last evening. There is an active frequency signature in the valley matching that handset's code. Silence on the line. 3 full seconds. You're certain? I don't use that word often, sir. Another second. Copy. We'll handle Drummond when we're out of this valley. What's Carson's status? She's moving, heading your direction. The patrol searched and came up empty, which means she's clear of that section. How is she moving? Wade considered how to answer that. Continuously, he said, which was accurate and also the least of what it was. The transmission ended. Wade went back to his scope. The light was coming up steadily now. He switched to optical and let the magnified clarity of the daylight optics replace the amplified grain of the monocular. The world sharpened. He found Riley at meter 260. She was at the base of a rock formation flat against the ground, moving her arms forward in the repetitive and exhausted rhythm of someone who has long since passed the point of deciding whether to continue and is now simply continuing. He watched her cover another 4 meters, then another 3. He was tracking the patrol's return arc simultaneously, and he did not like the geometry. They had swept down, come up empty, and were now quartering back across the drainage floor on a line that would intersect Riley's current position in approximately 8 minutes. Wade keyed his radio. Carson, Wade, you have company converging from your northeast 8 minutes. 3 individuals. I don't have a shot from my position without giving up overwatch on the canyon. The response was very quiet. Copy. A pause. Then, is there a weapon at my location? He searched his memory of the team's last known positions at the moment of the strike. Pemberton had been behind Riley in the column. Pemberton had been driven back toward the canyon mouth in the initial chaos, likely leaving his kit at or near the point of cover he had taken. Check your 6 o'clock, approximately 4 meters. Pemberton was behind you. He watched through the scope, watched her change direction, moving backward against everything her momentum had been building 4 grueling meters in the wrong direction. He saw her stop. He knew from the change in her position that she had found something. He watched her look at it for a long moment. From 1,200 meters through a high-powered scope, he could not read her face. He could read her stillness, though. The particular quality of a person confronting something they have spent a long time trying not to confront. She picked up the M24. He watched her check the chamber and the action with movements so practiced they did not look like something being remembered. They looked like something that lived in the hands below the level of decision. He noted that. He did not say anything about it. 8 minutes is now 6, he said. She settled into a firing position that worked with the limitations of her body, which meant she was not using her legs at all. She put the bipod against the rock. She found the natural point of aim. Wind is running northeast at 4 to 6 knots, Wade said, gusting slightly at elevation, but you're in the drainage, so it'll be steadier than the reading suggests. He watched. He waited. The 3-man patrol came back into the drainage from the north, moving in a loose spread, their lights now unnecessary in the growing morning. They were moving with the alertness of men who know they are looking for someone and expect to find them. 700 meters from Riley's position, then 650. 600. Wade measured the angle. He measured the wind. He measured his own breathing and found it steady, because this was what he did. This was the room he lived in when everything else went away. He watched Riley. At 640 meters, she fired. The shot went left, 3 feet at least, striking the rock face beside the lead man. The 3 men reacted immediately, scattering to cover. Wade watched Riley's position. He could see at this magnification the slight tremor in the barrel. The kind of shake that comes not from technique, but from blood loss and cold, and a body running on chemical reserves and nothing else. She cycled the bolt. The three men were relocating, beginning to orient toward the shot origin. He watched the stillness return to her position, settling through the tremor, settling through the blood loss and the destroyed legs and the inadequate morphine and everything else. He had watched a lot of shooters over a lot of years. The quality that was coming over Riley Carson in this moment, settling through all of it, he had seen that quality before in exactly three other people, and all three of them were in the top tier of the craft. She fired. The lead man dropped. 680 meters adjusted for wind, adjusted for the angle of the drainage, fired from a non-standard position by a person running on borrowed physiology. Clean. The other two men retreated up the slope in the focused way of men who have recalculated their situation and found it unfavorable. Wade exhaled. He kept his scope on Riley's position. He watched her cycle the bolt and hold for another 30 seconds, watching the slope, then slowly lower the rifle and go back to what she had been doing before. She put her forearms against the rock. She started pulling. He keyed the radio. He wanted to say several things. He said, "Targets are retreating. You're clear." Her voice, when it came back, was even. "Copy." "Carson." A pause. "Wade." He had questions. He had a significant number of questions, and they did not belong on a tactical radio channel with 40 people in a canyon. He filed every one of them. 680 meters, he said. "I just want to say that." There was a pause. When she spoke, there was nothing in her voice that sounded like pride. "First shot missed," she said. The wind correction on the second was manual. She was already pulling herself forward. Back at FOB Blessing, the senior intelligence officer on duty had received a signals report flagging the frequency anomaly in the valley. The report connected the active handset to Drummond's checkout record. Security personnel were now conducting a systematic search of the base. This was information Riley did not have. What she had was the ground under her forearms and the distance between where she was and where she needed to be, and the particular clarity that comes to a person who has simplified their situation to its absolute core. She had one thing to do. She was doing it. At meter 900, she stopped to check the tourniquet on her left leg. The standard clinical guidance was that tourniquets should be released briefly after 90 minutes to assess limb circulation and reduce the risk of permanent tissue damage. She was past 90 minutes on the left, closer to 105, and the clinical guidance did not change because following it was inconvenient. She released the left tourniquet for 2 minutes. She counted the seconds. She controlled her breathing and she watched the bleeding, and she felt what the change in circulation did to her body's overall resource consumption, and she made the call at 117 seconds because the data was sufficient. She reapplied. She had approximately 30 minutes of useful morphine coverage remaining. After that, the pain would be fully present and unmediated. She was thinking about this the way a navigator thinks about fuel, not with fear, with calculation. 30 minutes of coverage, 1,100 meters remaining. Her current pace was approximately 38 to 40 meters every 10 minutes. The math was not good. The math had never been good. That had not been the point. At meter 1,200, Wade's voice came back on the radio. "Carson, I need to tell you something before you have reason to make decisions that don't account for it." She pulled herself to a stopping point behind a rock formation and settled there. "Go ahead." The Taliban element in this valley knew our route before we arrived. They knew the corridor and the timing window. That information came from someone inside Blessing. She lay still for a moment. "Drummond?" A pause shorter than she expected. "Explain." She had been thinking about this for the last half hour in the background space of her mind, where patterns assembled themselves when you gave them room. The rote deviation that had brought them through the drainage. The IED, positioned with specific knowledge of how a column moves where the fourth person's foot would fall. The patrol behaving like a capture team rather than a kill team. All of it connected to one information problem someone had known. She had met Drummond at the FOB twice. He had the particular affect of someone performing competence rather than inhabiting it. The vocabulary without the understanding underneath it. The IED placement requires specific column movement knowledge that is not available from external observation alone, she said. Someone described the protocol, someone with access to operational planning. "We're on the same page," Wade said. "Security is handling it at the FOB level." She absorbed that, then the capture operation. "It's not about me being a medic." "No," he said, "it's not." His voice became more precisely what it already was, careful and exact, and without unnecessary softening. "The Taliban is running this because of the intelligence session 2 days ago. The grid data on the Kunar command node. You were the only non-credentialed person in that room when the S2 called the break. I was waiting for Captain Elridge to sign the medical supply authorization, she said. I know. I saw the grid. I know that too. She understood now the full shape of what she was inside of. The IED had not been meant to kill her. It had been meant to incapacitate her. The patrol had not been sweeping for a casualty. They had been executing a retrieval. Inside her memory and the part of her mind that held spatial and numerical data with the clarity of a photograph were coordinates that both sides needed and only one side was supposed to have. The grid is accurate, she said. I have it complete. I know you do, Python, Wade said. That is why you need to get out of this valley. She put her forearms against the rock. Working on it, she said. She started pulling again. Doc Harmon found the blood trail at meter 1840. He had been moving fast and low through the drainage for 11 minutes. Reeves 2 steps behind him, following the intelligence Wade had pushed down to the team element in the canyon. Harmon had done 3 tours. He had seen what IEDs did to legs. He was moving as fast as the terrain allowed and trying not to think about what he expected to find at the end of the trail. He had not expected her to still be moving. The trail was dark and wide and unbroken the way a trail looks when the body making it has been doing so for a long time without stopping. He followed it with his light held low, and then his light found her a small figure in multicam, pulling herself forward with both arms, legs trailing, moving at the pace of absolute determination rather than any remaining physical capacity. He covered the distance between them at a run. She heard him coming, and her right hand went to the M24 before he got within 10 meters, and he had the presence of mind to call his own name and unit clearly and without urgency because she was not in a condition to absorb surprises. The hand came off the rifle. She put her forehead against the rock for 1 second. It was the only moment in what he would later calculate had been approximately 2 hours of continuous movement where she allowed herself to stop completely. Then she lifted her head. Tourniquet status on both legs, she said. Her voice was lower than he had expected, but steady. Left is at approximately 140 minutes. Right is at 150. I've been cycling on the left. The right I haven't been able to reach in the last 40 minutes. He was already kneeling beside her, his kit open. Let me work. I'll talk you through it while you work. She turned her head and looked at him with gray eyes that were clear despite everything. My blood pressure is going to be low. Don't let that change your timeline. I need to stay functional for another 15 minutes. Reeves arrived and crouched on the other side of her. He was 29 years old and had seen serious trauma in 2 operational theaters, and the expression on his face was the expression of someone encountering something that recalibrates a category. He looked at the length of the trail behind her stretching back into the valley, and then he looked at her. 1,800 meters, he said. 40, she corrected. 1,840. I was counting. Harmon had both tourniquets reassessed and the right leg addressed in 4 minutes. He worked with the speed of someone who had trained this motion until it lived below conscious thought. She did not correct his technique. He chose to take that as a good sign. He reached for the morphine in his kit. No, she said. He looked at her. The morphine I have in my system is nearly gone. If you give me more now, it will push my blood pressure lower than it already is, and I won't be able to think clearly for the next 15 minutes. I need to think clearly for the next 15 minutes. She held his gaze. After the team is out, then morphine. He put the morphine back. She pushed herself up onto her forearms. I need to be forward to call the path. I was at ground level on the approach, and I have the IED indicators mapped from that angle. No one else has that picture. She looked at Harmon. Can you build a carry that keeps me face down? Reeves was already pulling the poncho from his kit. They built the carry in 90 seconds, not elegant, functional, which was what it needed to be. Harmon at the front, Reeves at the back, Riley face down between them on the stretched poncho, elevated enough to see the ground ahead, low enough to stay below any sight line on the ridgelines. Move on my mark, she said. When I say stop, stop immediately. When I say left or right, adjust the full team. Don't question the calls in the moment. Understood, Harmon said. She looked at the terrain ahead of her. She looked at it the way her father had looked at new ground, not quickly but completely, building the picture in layers near to far left to right, threats to features to route. Move, she said. They moved. The route from meter 1840 to the canyon mouth covered 360 meters of terrain that looked to the uninformed eye like ordinary Afghan valley floor. Rock and dirt and scrub, unremarkable, the kind of ground you would cross without slowing if you didn't know what it held. Riley knew what it held. She called the first stop at meter 70. There was a disturbed section of earth at the inside edge of a rock shelf, 3 feet to the right of the most natural walking line, placed by someone who understood that people under pressure moved toward the path of least resistance. The disturbance was subtle. The soil color was wrong by a shade that required context to read. She saw the difference. Left 4 feet, full team, stop. They stopped. They moved left. They continued. She called the second stop at meter 210. This one had been placed under time pressure, probably in the hours before the ambush. The pressure plate edge was just visible where the dirt had settled unevenly over the device. Right 8 feet. Hold that line for the next 20 meters. They held it. At meter 280, Slade's voice came through the radio. Wade says you're at the mouth. We're ready to move on your signal. She looked at the remaining ground. 80 meters of open drainage floor wider here where the canyon spilled into the valley. She scanned the ridgeline. She looked at the shadows at the upper edges. She looked at the ground. Give me 30 seconds, she said. She looked at the last 80 meters, the way her father had taught her to look at a shot, not at the target, but at everything between her and the target, every variable the terrain introduced. The way the morning light was now falling at a low angle that would backlight anyone moving from the canyon mouth. The way the eastern ridgeline had an overhang at the 200-meter mark that provided the only real covered firing position. Wade was already there. She knew this because Wade was the kind of person who would be already there. She keyed the radio. Wade, the overhang at 200 meters on the eastern ridge covered 2 seconds. Covered. Move, she told Slade. 20 abreast as wide as the terrain allows. Don't funnel. Move fast and spread the signature. The canyon mouth opened and 40 men came through it in the controlled and purposeful way of people who have been told exactly what to do by someone they have decided to trust. They spread across the available width of the drainage mouth, moving fast. Rangers and SEALs mixed together without ceremony. Wounded men supported by unwounded men. The entire element crossing the open ground in a sustained movement that gave any observer on the ridgeline a target problem instead of a target. 4 shots came from the eastern ridge, not the overhang. Higher, a secondary position that had not been visible from any sightline she had access to. Harmon went down with her fast and low, the carry dropping to the ground. She heard the shots and she heard what came after them, 4 returns so rapid they were almost continuous from the direction of Wade's position. The M40A3's unmistakable crack, not the heavy concussion of a .50 caliber, but something more deliberate, more precise. 4 times. 4 times in a rhythm that was not hurried. The shots from the ridge stopped. She heard nothing more from that position. Slade was at her side in 20 seconds. He crouched low, his face carrying the expression of someone who has been managing a catastrophic situation for 2 hours and can see the edge of it. He looked at her. He looked at the carry. He looked at the trail behind her. He did not say anything for a moment. All 40 out, she asked. All 40. 6 wounded, none critical. Pemberton's got a graze on his left arm from the contact in the canyon. He paused. He is going to talk about the rhabdomyolysis thing for the rest of his career. She almost smiled. Slade looked at her with the expression of a man who has something to say and is deciding how. He was not a man accustomed to uncertainty about his own speech. The route you called, he said, the IED positions. I mapped them on the approach. Ground level gives you different indicators than aerial or map review. The EOD sweep was 2 weeks ago, and fresh placement looks different from age placement. You mapped them mentally. I didn't have paper. He looked at her for another moment. The shot at 680 meters. She did not respond immediately. Wade logged it, Slade said. He logs everything. He doesn't log things that aren't accurate. The habit of not talking about this was deep enough that even here, even now, it required active effort to override. My father taught me, she said finally. I stopped when he died. I was 22. She looked at Slade directly. I made a promise to my mother. I have been a medic for 6 years. I intended to stay one. Slade absorbed this. He was quiet in the way of someone processing new information about the shape of the world. You saved 40 lives in this valley, he said, counting Pemberton from last night. The counting doesn't change what I did to do it. No, he said. It doesn't. He reached to his chest. He unpinned the trident, the Naval Special Warfare insignia, the anchor and eagle and trident and pistol that SEALs called the Budweiser, that represented a selection process so demanding that 2/3 of candidates didn't finish it, that no one in that community handed to anyone else lightly. He set it on the ground beside her right hand. He did not make a speech. He was not a man who made speeches. He stood and moved back to his team. Hollis came and went without ceremony, which was consistent with everything else about him. He stood over her for 3 seconds, looked at the trail behind her, the way a man looks at something that has settled, a long argument he has been having with himself, and then he set his water bottle beside her hand and walked back to the team. He had been the first one to see it that night at the rest halt when her mouth had moved before she could stop it. He had not needed to say that. She knew. He knew she knew. Stovall came next. He stood over her with an expression she could not fully read. Not the skepticism from the briefing room, but something that had replaced it, something that looked like a man confronting the distance between what he had assumed and what had turned out to be true. He was not comfortable. She respected him for not performing comfort he didn't feel. I said things before the mission, he said. You did. I was wrong about what I said. She looked at him. You were doing your job. You needed to know if I was an asset or a problem. You didn't have information. You made an assessment from what you had. She paused. So did I. He stood there for a moment. What did you assess? That you were good at your job and fair enough to change your mind when the evidence changed, she said. I was right about both. Something in his face shifted, the small shift of a person who has been assessed accurately by someone they underestimated. He nodded once and walked away. Pemberton arrived last, moving carefully on his left side, the graze on his forearm, wrapped in a field dressing. He crouched beside her, the way someone crouches beside a person they are not sure how to address. Twice, he said. She looked at him. You got me last night, and you got all of us this morning. That's twice. The rhabdomyolysis was going to surface regardless. I just found it before it found you. That's not nothing, he said. That's actually the whole thing. He was quiet for a moment. My wife's name is Catherine. My kids are 6 and 8. Their grandfather was a medic in Korea. He used to say the medics were the ones who held the whole thing together, that without them, the rest was just machinery. He looked at her directly. He was right. She held his gaze. She did not deflect this one. Some things you take and hold without redirection because the person offering them needs you to. Go get that arm properly dressed, she said. The field wrap is loose on the proximal edge. He looked at his arm, looked back at her. Of course you noticed that. He went to find Harmon. The morphine went in 4 minutes later. This time she did not argue. The world softened around the edges in the specific way that morphine softens things, and she looked up at the sky of Kunar province, which was fully light, now the blue-gray of a high-altitude morning, and she thought about the coordinates that were still in her head, precise and complete. 8 digits of grid reference that she had not spoken aloud to anyone other than Wade's brief acknowledgement. She asked Harmon for paper and a pen. He looked at her. I have grid coordinates that need to reach the S2 at Blessing before the handset window closes. 8-digit MGRS. If I lose consciousness before we extract, I need this on paper. He found a pen. He tore a section from the inside of a packaging wrapper in his kit. She recited the coordinates. She recited them twice, once normally, once with the digits transposed, and then corrected the field verification method her father had taught her for confirming recall accuracy. Both recitations matched. She folded the paper and pressed it into Harmon's hand. Chain of custody, she said, your hand to the S2's hand, nobody else. He closed his fingers around it. Copy. She put her head back against the rock. She let the morphine do its work. Above her, the sky continued to be the particular color of a morning that has come through something and arrived on the other side. The extraction helicopter reached their position 47 minutes later. AUH-60 Black Hawk from the 101st Combat Aviation Brigade running low and fast up the valley. Riley heard it before anyone mentioned it. She had learned to identify rotary aircraft by sound years before she had ever seen the inside of a military installation. She was loaded onto a litter for the movement to the bird. She did not argue about the litter. There was a line between managing your situation and performing stoicism for no operational purpose, and she had located that line clearly enough in the last 3 hours. Slade walked with the litter to the helicopter door. He did not have to do this. He did it. He put his hand briefly on her shoulder. That was all. The door closed. The aircraft lifted. Below her, visible through the window for a few seconds before the helicopter banked, she could see the drainage, a long, pale scar in the darker ground of the valley, the light catching the rock at an angle that showed every variation in the surface. She closed her eyes as the valley fell away behind them. She had done the thing she had come here to do, which was not the thing she had been sent here to do, which was not the thing anyone had expected her to do. She had done all three anyway. She let that be enough for now. She slept before they crossed the first ridgeline. 72 hours after the Black Hawk lifted from the drainage in Kunar province, a B-1B Lancer out of Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar reached its release point over a compound network in the mountains northeast of FOB Blessing. The crew had been flying for 4 hours. The targeting package they were executing had been built in the preceding 48 hours from a single source of intelligence, 8 digits of grid reference confirmed twice delivered by a corpsman on a field extraction litter to an S2 officer in the doorway of a medical tent. The Lancer carried 2 GBU-31 Joint Direct Attack munitions. Both found their marks within 4 meters of the designated coordinates. The compound was subsequently confirmed to have housed a Taliban command element responsible for coordinating operations throughout the Kunar province corridor. The strike was logged in the subsequent after-action reports as the most consequential single intelligence-driven action in the Kunar region for the calendar year. 14 individuals of senior operational significance. Gone. Riley did not know any of this when it happened. She was at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, 3 days post-extraction in the middle of her second surgery. She was not conscious when the strike occurred. She was not conscious for the subsequent hours when the intelligence reports came in. She was conscious 4 days later when a signals intelligence officer from the S2 shop arrived at Landstuhl, sat beside her bed, and gave her a 2-sentence summary of the strike outcome. He stated the facts, thanked her, and left. She lay with that information for a long time. The investigation into Drummond had concluded by then. What emerged did not look like the picture she had initially held in her mind. Drummond had not sold the road information because he was built from the kind of material that chooses betrayal casually. He had arrived in Afghanistan carrying a financial situation that had collapsed over 2 years through decisions that were separately understandable and collectively catastrophic. A failed business, a second mortgage, a personal loan at terms that had become untenable. He had been approached through a channel he had not recognized as Taliban connected until it was too late to extract himself cleanly. By the time he understood what he was inside of the leverage they held was sufficient to make refusal feel impossible. The investigation also confirmed what Riley had suspected about Doyle. The broken wrist had not been an accident. A message had moved through a cutout to someone on base with access to the pre-deployment staging area. A shifted equipment crate, a specific weight, a specific angle, a specific moment when no one was watching. 3 broken bones and Riley Carson's name moved from the reserve list to the roster. Drummond had needed a replacement who would not know the team. He had not counted on what the replacement knew. None of them had. This did not make what Drummond did defensible. 40 people had come very close to dying in a canyon because of information he had provided, and 1 person had destroyed her legs covering the ground his information had created. The math of that was not changed by his circumstances. But when Riley thought about Drummond, and she did think about him more than she expected to, she thought about the specific shape of being trapped. About the way that choices made under pressure compound until a person is looking at a situation they did not design and cannot see a way through. She did not forgive this. She was not sure forgiveness was hers to offer. But she understood it in the way you understand something that has its own internal logic even when the outcome is wrong. This was part of what her father had tried to put into words at the end of his letter. The harder thing, the thing that kept asking you to keep giving. She was still giving. The right leg was going to require a 3rd surgery. The left leg below the knee was not a leg anymore. She had been told this with clinical precision by a surgeon at Landstuhl who had the quality of directness she respected. Most people need a moment, he said after telling her. I knew the day it happened, she said. I assessed it myself in the drainage. I kept the tourniquet on because the alternative was losing the blood volume, and losing the blood volume meant not reaching the canyon. The surgeon was quiet for a moment. The right leg, he said. That's a different story. We can give you that one back. I know, she said. I felt the difference in the acute phase. He studied her for a moment with the expression of a person recalibrating a category. You assessed all of this while it was happening. I'm a medic, she said. It's what I do. 6 months later, the room at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, where Riley held her first session of the Integrated Combat Medicine course, was not large. It held 18 people comfortably, and on the first morning it held exactly 18 Navy corpsmen, 6 Army medics, and 4 Air Force pararescuemen ranging in age from 22 to 34, seated in the specific attentive posture of people who have been told that what they are about to learn is worth paying attention to. Riley stood at the front of the room. She stood straight. She had relearned straight standing over 4 months with a physical therapist named Carver, who did not accept approximations, and who treated complaints about difficulty with the professional indifference of someone who knows that indifference is a more effective treatment than sympathy. She wore her uniform with the same precision she had always worn it. The silver star was there among the ribbons at her chest. She wore it neither prominently nor minimized. She had a slight asymmetry in her posture from the prosthetic on the left side, a difference in how her weight distributed. She did not try to conceal it. Concealing it would have required a performance of normalcy she did not have time for and would not have found honest. She wrote 6 words on the whiteboard behind her. Heal when you can, fight when you must. She drew a line under those 6 words and wrote 2 more. Know the difference. She turned back to the room. This course is not about dual qualification in the traditional sense, she said. It is not about turning medics into shooters or shooters into medics. It is about something that is harder than either of those things. She looked at the room, not at individual faces, but at all of them, simultaneously the way she looked at terrain. It is about understanding that the hands that put a tourniquet on a femoral bleed and the hands that put a round on a 600-meter target are the same hands. Knowing when to use each set of skills and making that transition without losing either capability is the thing that makes you worth having in a team. She paused. Some of you have been in situations where healing was not enough. Some of you haven't yet, and you will. The question this course is built around is not whether you are physically capable of both. You are. The question is whether you understand deeply enough why you are doing either one to make the right call in the moment when both options are available to you. She moved to the table at the front of the room, moving without self-consciousness about the prosthetic, without the careful performance of normalcy that would have suggested she was aware of being watched. She was aware of being watched. She chose to be unaffected by it. We will spend the first week on assessment, she said. Not assessment of the situation, assessment of yourself, your physical limits and your technical limits, and the gap between where you are and where the situation will eventually require you to be. She looked at the room. That gap is not a problem. That gap is the curriculum. Afterward, Pemberton, who had requested a transfer to the instructor cadre for the first run of the course, and whose request had been approved with a speed that suggested endorsement above his current command, found her in the corridor. He had his left arm in a sleeve that was still slightly stiff, where the graze had healed imperfectly. He would carry that stiffness for the rest of his career. First class, he said. What did you think? 17 of the 18 have operational experience. They don't need to be convinced the material matters. They need sequencing. She looked at her notes. The Air Force PJs are ahead of the others on the integration piece. The Army medics will need more time on the decision framework. And the 18th, she had already noted him. The youngest in the room, 22, 3 months out of his credentialing course with the specific look of someone who knows they are behind and is not sure the gap is closable. She had been watching him all morning. He's going to be the best in the room by week 3. He's paying attention at a level the others have to remind themselves to sustain. Pemberton smiled. You spotted that from the front of the room. My father called it reading the room, she said. He meant any room. A mountain, a valley, a briefing hall. She gathered her materials. It's learnable. That's the first thing I'm going to tell him tomorrow. She walked out into the corridor. The November morning outside the windows was gray and cold, and she had been in enough of it over the past months to have rebuilt her relationship with cold entirely. Cold was manageable. Cold had always been manageable. Montana had established that very early. She found a quiet space near the end of the corridor, where the window looked out over the grounds, and she stood there for a moment with her coffee and took her phone from her pocket. Her mother answered on the second ring. Riley. The voice was the voice of home, the specific quality that had been the sound of safety since she was old enough to understand what safety meant. How was the first day? Good, she said. 18 students, serious people. Are you eating? She almost smiled. Yes. Your voice sounds tired. It was a long morning, good long, the kind of long that means you were doing the right thing. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Your father used to say that, the good kind of tired. Riley looked out the window. The grounds were quiet in the gray morning, a few people crossing the paths between buildings, each of them carrying whatever they were carrying in the way that people at Walter Reed carry things, not always visibly, but present. Mom, she said, yes. I broke the promise. She had said this before in the weeks immediately after Afghanistan, but she said it now differently, not as confession, as a piece of the picture she wanted her mother to have complete. In the drainage, there was a rifle, and I used it. I don't know that I would make a different choice if I had the day over. I know, her mother said. I've always known you might have to. Riley was quiet. I made you make that promise because I was afraid, her mother said. After your father, I was so afraid. A pause that carried weight across any distance. But I knew when I asked you to keep it that I might be asking you to make yourself smaller than you are. I hoped the moment would never come where it mattered. I should have hoped for something else. What should you have hoped for? That when the moment came, you would do exactly what you did. Her mother's voice was steady in the specific way of someone who has processed something through a long time and arrived at the other side of it. He was right about you, Riley. He was right about everything he wrote in that letter. She stood at the window for a long time after the call ended. The November light was thin and flat and honest, the kind of light that does not flatter but does illuminate, and she stood in it with her coffee growing cold, and she thought about her father and the trail she had left across a valley in Afghanistan and the 18 people sitting in a room down the hall who had come to learn something she had learned in the worst way that things get learned. She thought about what he had written, the harder thing. It takes more from you, and it asks you to keep giving. She was still giving. She intended to keep giving. That was not a burden she carried reluctantly. It was the shape of who she was assembled from everything she had come from and everything that had happened and everything still ahead. You did not apologize for the shape of yourself when the shape had proven under the specific pressures of a September morning in Kunar province to be exactly what was required. She put her phone in her pocket. She finished the cold coffee without complaint. She turned from the window. Down the hall, 17 experienced operators and one 22-year-old who did not know yet that he was going to be the best in the room were waiting for the afternoon session. 3 months after the first class graduated, the Veterans Administration formally requested expansion of the integrated combat medicine curriculum to training centers in 4 states. The program's framework, developed from Riley's notes and Pemberton's operational input, became the foundation of a new approach to combined field qualification that the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps were each independently reviewing. A sentence from Riley's first day of instruction had made its way through the community, passed from one corpsman to another, the way useful things travel without ceremony and without attribution, until it simply existed as part of the vocabulary. Drag them out alive. Nobody remembered exactly who said it first. Nobody needed to. 6 months after that, a briefing folder landed on Riley's desk at Walter Reed with a timestamp of 0800 the following morning. She looked at the cover sheet. She looked at the operational area designation. She looked at the date. She thought about a morning in Kunar province. She thought about a trail of 2,000 meters and what it had cost and what it had bought. She thought about a letter written in 2 different pens and about the kind of pride that does not need to be spoken to be real. She closed the folder. She set it on the corner of her desk where she would see it first thing when she arrived in the morning. She put on her coat and she walked out into the November evening, straight-backed and unhurried, carrying what she carried, keeping nothing back that the situation required her to give. The hallway was quiet behind her. Her footsteps were steady. She had work to do.